our fate is now intrinsically linked to the fate of other living entities, both humans, non-humans, organic species, biological species, and even mineral species. So we live at an age of planetary entanglement when the local is in the global is in the local, and our fates are intertwined. And we wanted to provide an autonomous space for African thought to embrace this new condition, this planetary condition, and contribute to the global conversation we need to have in terms of its sustainability and in terms of opening the future to all.
How does this notion of the planetary differentiate from an idea of globalization? If I understood your lecture correctly yesterday, the commonality and the care for a common space seems to be very critical for that. But can you give us a little difference between what is globalization and the planetary, or how do they intertwine?
The planetary, as we understand it, is not exactly the same thing as the international, the transnational, nor is it the same thing as the global. The global in particular has mostly referred to economic processes that have brought the world under the aegis of capitalism under one major web, although of course with different positionalities within that web. We are talking about something more let's say exhaustive. We are talking about the earth with a capital E, something not cosmological but something related to the cosmos and its many inhabitants. We are trying to exit from a vision of history in which, in line with the what mostly Western modernity has assumed, a vision of history in which humans are at the center of everything, and by humans mostly white people, Europeans, and everything else is at their service, and they can use it, abuse it, as long as it procures them the kind of enjoyment they have erected as the ultimate goal for human existence. We want to exit that, and in line with let's say ancient as well as worldwide perspectives found elsewhere, reconsider the earth as composed of multiple inhabitants, rethink the possibility of earthly existence and sustenance, not only as social but also as physical, as organic, in a type of holistic manner necessary for the ages we are entering in now.
And another idea that came up yesterday in your lecture was that when we say that globalization is often about circulation of goods or financial means, you came up with an example of restricted mobility, and you talked specifically about Gaza and how this is like an enclosed entity where people cannot come out. At the panel before your lecture, at the closing remarks, the moderator, who is from Beirut, was, I think, the only person at the conference who mentioned this parallel between the apartheid regime in South Africa and the current condition of Palestinians in Israel. Can you elaborate a little bit about what you think about Gaza and the situation and how this corresponds to the idea of the planetary?
Yes, it's a very complex question, so I will just make a few gestures here and there and hope that this might illuminate what the thesis is all about. The thesis is that we have reached the limits of the world. we have reached the limits of the world in the sense that we are gradually awakening to the consciousness that that world is not unlimited. It's not. It has boundaries beyond which it cannot extend. And what we are witnessing is that instead of developing new ideas about how to share it, how to make it sustainable, in many parts of our world right now, people are falling back into the idea of building walls, erecting boundaries, making it impossible for everybody to move. And therefore, it seems to me, one of the key questions of the century that is unfolding will be the government of human mobility. Definition of who belongs to the world, who can move around it, who shouldn't be moving, or who should only be moving under very restrictive conditions, most of which are, as we know, as we have known all along, are racialized. The division of human species into subspecies, the classification, the being put into a hierarchy in which some are at the top, others are at the bottom. And Gaza represents precisely the epitome of that way of partitioning the world, of subdividing it, of redistributing it between those who count and those who cannot count, who do not count, and therefore those whom we can discard without having anything to pay for it. So this question of mobility and circulation, it seems to me, will be at the heart of most of the struggles that are coming, whether they are undertaken in the name of God, religion, or in the name of identity, politics of identity that has become extremely toxic.
When we talk about mobility, we talk about the mobility of a physical body.
Yes.
And yesterday, you expressed a very critical view towards technology. So when I think back a few years ago, there was this big utopian, or at least very optimistic vision about what can the internet and cyberspace and virtual reality bring us. And so there was the idea of a sharing economy and the idea of endless mobility of data or digitalized bodies or something like that. And I read, I think 2 weeks ago, there was a conference in Saudi Arabia, and there was a female robot presented, and this European-looking female humanoid robot received the status of citizenship, whereas in Saudi there are many people, workers especially from Southeast Asia, who do not account to this status of Saudi citizenship. You talked a bit about this technological dystopia that we're entering with the internet and with digitalization. Can you tell a bit more about this view of technology?
I'm interested in what is it that it does, what kind of human subject is in the process of being fabricated through his relation with the technological, and more importantly with the computational. Just as there was a certain kind of human that was produced through the interaction with the machine in the 19th century, we have to,
like the automats,
understand properly what kind of human is it that automation and the computational are inventing. So that is the let's say the project. I am not in denial insofar as the reality of is that the digital has allowed for an expanded scope for circulation of all kinds of things, of ideas, of money, of artifacts and so on and so on. We are living in an age, therefore, of expansion of modalities of circulation. Anything is equivalent to anything else. It's opinion against opinion, which puts into question the very concept of both truth, if an opinion is just another opinion like any other opinion. What is the status of truth? How do we find out what truth is and what is not true? And if we can no longer verify the parameters of what is truth and what is not, how do we account for actions that derive from a democratization of opinions?
Yeah.
Because there is no accountability if there is no truth. And there is no democracy if there is no accountability. It's what I believe, what you believe, a clash.
In this context, you made a very interesting remark yesterday that I found truly fascinating, and that brings us back to the idea of artists or art and the creative, which is the subliminal, and that sublimation is on a retreat or something like that.
It is out of the window.
Yeah. Oh,
because that's what civilization, what we call civilization. I'm not talking about civilization in the silly sense. People speak of clash of civilizations, which is ridiculous, frankly. I'm talking about civilization in the sense important thinkers, people like Freud and others, thought about it. The process by which we try to domesticate our natural instincts and without eliminating them, because they cannot be eliminated, we domesticate them and we direct them for purposes of common existence. A common existence that is as pacified as possible, or in any case, a common existence in which, let's say, the conditions are created for some convivial exchange and interaction that does not automatically lead to war and destruction. What the new digital technologies do is that they erase those, they weaken, they cripple those capacities for sublimation and replace them with a visceral, instant-like drive for their discharge. So I'm sitting in front of the screen. I can say anything I wasn't allowed to say in a face-to-face interaction in public. All these drives are unleashed. I can lie, I can traffic, I can fake, I can pretend. There's no longer any field of prohibitions. There are no taboos. When we destroy all the taboos, we destroy every single prohibition, we open a boulevard for the discharge, public discharge of instincts. I think we have a problem. The outsourcing of any individual responsibility, which we see, for instance, all that has to do with drone killing.
Yeah, I was thinking about it.
That we think that major decisions of life and death have to be made by machines. Because presumably killing with a drone is cleaner, and we pretend that killing with a drone is more ethical than a decapitation. So we have a problem when we reach that level.
I mean, the other question is, for whom is it more ethical? So the only person considered is like the executor or the soldier who maybe doesn't have to suffer a post-traumatic disorder after decapitating somebody. Yes. But for the person being killed, there's no difference, basically.
It doesn't
whether
matter.
It's a drone or
no, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. I want to end the interview with something that's related to that, and I guess that was quite a surprise to a few people yesterday in the audience, because quite a number of the performances and of the panel discussions dealt with the issue of identity politics or identity-based artworks, performances, and you were calling for a moratorium on identity politics for at least a year, if I remember correctly.
I mean, a year.
Something like that.
Calling for a moratorium on all of that.
Yeah.
We have been dealing with this for too long, and with really terrible consequences. It's time now to wake up to the consequences of these long years of identity politics. At least let me develop this in two ways. First of all, it is worth reminding everyone that the question of subaltern identity, because that's what we're talking about, was a very important question throughout the history of modernity, because, as we know, there were some people who pretend to be more human than others. They had better identities than others. It was important during the times of slavery, colonialism, apartheid, and so forth and so on. Questions of race, class, gender in particular. It was absolutely important. To some extent, it's still somewhat important. So, it was important because identity was then enlisted in the overall project of emancipation that came up with modernity. Modernity was not simply about the conquest and subjugation of the world through the law of imperialism and capitalism. It also came with basic universal ideas of freedom and emancipation for all, which were proclaimed but not always implemented. So how to close the gap between the discourse and the praxis was an important nexus of the political. Now, one thing is going on as we speak, which is that the vocabulary of identity, in its progressive emancipatory dimension, is being colonized by forces that are against emancipation. White supremacy, which is re-emerging worldwide, the escalation of racism, especially in Europe and in America, and the call in most parts of the northern world of a return to a period of history they call dark enlightenment, if something like that makes any sense. Right-wing populism, the sentiment, anti-immigration sentiment, the idea, the desire for apartheid, the idea that people want to live only amongst themselves, they don't want to live with others any longer, they want to live in closed communities, and this partitioning and repartitioning of the world is often made in the name of identity, is being made in the name of identity. So a politics of identity in and of itself is no longer necessarily emancipatory. So from a purely intellectual point of view, we have to reconsider what we mean by identity, and we have to have a new look at the types of politics we might be encouraging, maybe in spite of ourselves. We can't be naive any longer when it comes to questions of identity. That we have to rediscover what is that ground zero that brings us all together, where we can, the verification of our being human with other species is possible.